For a long time, the galaxy had whispered about one strange and unpredictable species, the humans. Every advanced civilization knew their name. Even those who had never met one had heard the stories. They called them Deathworlders, a term that sent a quiet chill through any council chamber or military base whenever it was mentioned. Humanity came from a world that most species wouldn't even dare to step on. Earth was violent, unpredictable, and dangerous. Yet somehow humans didn't just survive there, they thrived. Their home was filled with storms that could wipe out entire cities, lands that shook and burned, and animals that could kill with a single bite. And still, these people built cities, sent machines into the stars, and turned every challenge into a lesson. Other species found the humans fascinating, but also terrifying. How could a people so fragile-looking endure such chaos and still smile? How could they push themselves into space when their own planet tried to kill them daily? The stories grew with every encounter. Tales of humans climbing the deadliest mountains for fun, of diving into dark seas to explore, of building machines that crossed impossible distances. By the time humanity joined the wider galaxy, their reputation had already spread far and wide. No other species had adapted so quickly to the unknown. The first contact reports described them as unsettlingly determined. The second called them creatures of extremes. The third simply said, "They do not stop." That phrase stuck in the minds of the galactic powers. They saw humanity's potential and their danger. When humans entered the council halls for the first time, many ambassadors avoided direct eye contact. Some out of caution, some out of pure fear. They had seen recordings of humans fighting against all odds, rescuing allies even when outnumbered, and surviving events that would have killed others instantly. Over time, trade began, alliances formed, and a fragile trust developed. But under that trust, the galaxy still held one deep belief. If humanity ever chose to unleash its full might, no one could stand against them. So they watched carefully. They respected Earth's policies, agreed to its treaties, and kept a safe distance from its military operations. Most galactic civilizations had never seen human soldiers in action. They had only read about them in historical files, small wars on distant moons, rescue missions, or peacekeeping operations. Those reports were impressive but distant, something academic, something not real to most species. But then came the day when the galaxy got to see them, not in archived footage, not in rumor, but live. It started quietly, far from human space. A distress signal came from a border world, a colony called Varan Prime. It was a peaceful planet, known for its forests and crystal blue lakes, home to several gentle species. For years, it had been a symbol of unity among alien races, but that peace shattered in a single night. A group of mercenary raiders attacked without warning. They were not pirates or simple thieves. They were organized, equipped with heavy weapons, and trained with precision. Within hours, entire cities were burning. Communications were jammed. Thousands fled underground while the skies turned red. Varan Prime's government sent desperate messages to the Galactic Council for help. They begged for ships, for soldiers, for anything. But the Council hesitated. Every race had its own reasons. Some were afraid to risk their fleets. Others argued about jurisdiction, legal borders, or resource costs. Bureaucracy drowned the cries for help. Days passed and the situation worsened. The raiders showed no mercy. The Council sat frozen until a quiet message arrived from the human delegation. It was short, almost casual. Permission to assist? The room fell silent. The counselors looked at one another. They knew what that meant. Once humans stepped in, there was no turning back. No control, no half measures, only total commitment. Some feared the chaos that might follow. Others feared what would happen if humanity didn't intervene. After a long pause, permission was granted, and that was when the galaxy's understanding of fear changed forever. Within hours, Earth's fleet mobilized. There were no long speeches, no public broadcasts. Humans didn't boast. They didn't threaten. They simply prepared. Massive ships rose silently from the oceans and deserts of Earth, their dark hulls glowing faintly against the clouds. Smaller vessels launched from orbiting stations. Every move was smooth, practiced, and without wasted motion, like a machine that had done this 1,000 times before. When the fleet entered Varan Prime's system, even the local sensors struggled to track their approach. The human ships moved in complete coordination, each one knowing its exact role. There was no chaos, no hesitation. The watching alien commanders had never seen such control, and yet what shocked them most wasn't the power, it was the calm. The humans did not speak of vengeance or dominance. Their transmissions were quiet, disciplined, professional. They spoke only of rescue operations, civilian recovery zones, and neutralization of hostile elements. The first live feed came from a news drone hovering above Varen Prime's main city. It captured the moment the human landing craft entered the atmosphere, sleek, black shapes slicing through the burning skies. Fire and smoke raged below, but the ships didn't flinch. They descended with mathematical precision, cutting through the chaos as if guided by instinct. The aliens watching across the galaxy felt their breath catch. The humans weren't like any other force they had seen. They didn't bombard from orbit. They didn't destroy to prove a point. They landed. They went down there themselves. Reports from the surface described them moving in small, tight groups, their armor reflecting the orange light of the fires. They carried equipment unknown to most species, adaptable weapons, drones that followed hand signals, medkits that worked even under heavy fire. Civilians who had been hiding for days saw them for the first time, silent figures emerging through smoke and dust, scanning for survivors. When the first alien refugees approached, trembling, a human soldier simply said, "You're safe now." Those words, simple as they were, carried across the galaxy through news networks and council feeds. Billions watched. The same species that everyone feared, the so-called monsters from the death world, were seen protecting strangers with a level of care and calm no one expected. At that moment, the galaxy realized something. Humanity's danger wasn't in their strength or their weapons. It was in their resolve. Once they chose to act, they acted with everything they had, not for conquest, but for protection. The first day of their arrival changed everything. The terrified broadcasts from Varen Prime slowly turned into reports of rescue and relief. People started to believe that survival was possible again. The human fleet didn't celebrate. They didn't send propaganda. They just worked, tirelessly, efficiently, quietly. And across the galaxy, leaders, soldiers, and civilians alike watched in awe. The stories they had heard about humans were true, but incomplete. The Death Worlders weren't just dangerous. They were disciplined. They were compassionate. They were unstoppable when it mattered. In the following days, even the most skeptical counselors began to understand. The galaxy had feared humanity for all the wrong reasons. Yes, humans were tough. Yes, they were unpredictable. But their true power came from something deeper. A belief that no life should be left behind. No fight should be lost to fear. Varen Prime's tragedy had drawn out the very best of them. And as the stars watched those dark ships move across the burning sky, a quiet realization spread. If this was how humanity responded to a single call for help, what would happen if they ever decided to defend the entire galaxy? Varen Prime was a peaceful world, the kind of place that made visitors forget there were darker corners in the galaxy. Its cities were quiet, surrounded by wide lakes that shimmered blue under twin suns. People of different species lived together, trading, farming, and raising families. For years it had been known as the Emerald World, a symbol of cooperation and trust among alien nations, but that trust didn't protect it. One quiet evening, sensors on the outer rim detected strange energy signatures. At first, local authorities thought it was a meteor shower or a malfunction. Then, without warning, a fleet of unknown ships came out of the dark. They were fast, sharp-edged, and cold-looking, not a trading fleet, not explorers. The first attack came within minutes. Defense grids tried to respond, but were instantly overrun. The attackers weren't ordinary pirates. They were something far worse. Mercenaries bred for war. They used weapons that could melt steel, drones that hunted down survivors, and jammers that cut every line of communication. Within hours, whole districts were burning. Panic spread. The cities that once glowed with life turned into mazes of smoke and ruin. Families ran into underground tunnels, hiding wherever they could. No one knew who these invaders were or what they wanted. They took supplies, destroyed shelters, and left nothing behind. The government of Varen Prime sent urgent messages to nearby systems, but every channel was blocked. Somehow the invaders had planned it perfectly. They left the planet blind and isolated. For 3 long days, chaos ruled. The weak tried to flee to the mountains while others stayed in ruined basements, whispering prayers to gods long forgotten. The smell of smoke filled the air. It was hard to breathe, harder to hope. Finally, a few small outposts managed to send a signal through an emergency relay, a desperate call for help. It reached the Galactic Council, a group made up of the most powerful civilizations across the stars. The message was simple. Varen Prime has fallen. We need help, please. Someone, answer. In the council chambers, representatives gathered. Holograms flickered around the Great Hall as dozens of alien leaders debated what to do. Some wanted to send a fleet immediately. Others wanted to study the situation first. A few simply said, it's too dangerous. They were afraid, not just of the attackers, but of who might get involved. Everyone in that room knew one thing. If humans entered this conflict, the balance of power across the galaxy could change. For hours, they argued. One race demanded a peace talk. Another wanted to seal off the system completely. As the debate dragged on, more desperate transmissions arrived from Varen Prime. The voices were weaker each time. That's when a single human representative stood and said something that silenced the entire room. We'll go. Those two words carried more weight than any threat. The council turned toward the human envoy. Some protested immediately. They warned about the consequences, about the destruction that could follow. But the human didn't argue. They only repeated calmly, we will go. Permission was eventually granted, not because everyone agreed, but because no one else was willing to move first. The council's hope was that humans would simply provide assistance, maybe evacuations or medical aid. But what came next would be remembered forever. Back on Earth, orders spread quietly through military channels. There were no public announcements, no media coverage, no speeches. Only coded messages sent to certain divisions, the kind that answered without hesitation. These were not regular soldiers. They were the elite, the kind of people who had trained their entire lives for the worst conditions imaginable. They had operated in zero visibility, extreme temperatures, and under constant fire. They had seen what others couldn't endure. When the call came, they didn't ask questions. They prepared. Across Earth's bases, black ships began to rise from the atmosphere. Each vessel was built for speed and strength, coated with armor that absorbed radar signals. On board, teams checked their gear in silence. No one spoke of victory or revenge. Their mission was simple: save lives. As the fleet entered slipspace, the stars stretched into long white lines. Minutes later, they emerged near Varen Prime. The system was quiet, almost too quiet. The only signals were from burning satellites and drifting wreckage. The moment the human fleet appeared, the attackers reacted. Their ships turned toward the new arrivals, ready for battle. But the humans didn't respond immediately. They scanned the system, identified targets, and moved with perfect coordination. To outside observers, it looked almost effortless, ships gliding into formation as if they shared one mind. Then came the first strike. A group of human vessels fired small, controlled bursts that disabled the enemy's command ship's engines without destroying it. It was a warning, a message that said, we could end this, but we choose not to yet. Inside the council's observation chambers, alien officers watched in disbelief. They had seen many species fight, but never like this. Human pilots maneuvered their ships through narrow asteroid fields, dodging plasma fire, communicating with nothing more than short code bursts. It wasn't rage or chaos. It was precision. While the battle in space raged on, the first human dropships entered Varen Prime's atmosphere. They broke through clouds of smoke and ash, descending into the ruined cities. The local survivors saw strange silhouettes falling from the sky. Armored figures with glowing visors and packs that allowed them to glide between collapsed buildings. Where others would panic, the humans worked methodically. They set up beacons, cleared landing zones, and started pulling people out of danger. Every move had a purpose. When they encountered frightened civilians, they didn't shout or rush. They spoke softly, offering water, food, and calm words. Some aliens had never heard the human language before, but somehow they understood the tone. It was steady, reassuring. The invaders tried to resist, but they were overwhelmed. The humans didn't fight like soldiers seeking glory. They fought like protectors defending a home. They used strategy instead of sheer force, surrounding enemy groups, cutting their supply lines, and capturing leaders alive for questioning. The most surprising thing was what they didn't do. They didn't burn cities to the ground. They didn't take trophies. They didn't demand repayment. They focused only on saving lives and restoring order. Meanwhile, in the skies above, the human fleet held the line. Every time the attackers tried to escape, they were intercepted and disarmed. The few that managed to flee vanished into deep space, never to be heard from again. By the end of the third day, Varan Prime was no longer burning. Smoke still rose from the ruins, but the gunfire had stopped. Human engineers started repairing power grids and communication relays. Medical teams set up field hospitals that treated not just the wounded, but even captured enemies. From orbit, the planet looked scarred but alive. For the first time in weeks, the survivors could breathe without fear. They watched the humans work side by side with local volunteers, fixing homes, cleaning debris, and comforting children. To them, these were not the monsters that the galaxy had warned about. They were something else entirely. Word spread fast. Across star systems, news channels broadcast live footage of human rescue teams carrying injured civilians, handing out supplies and clearing streets. The same hands that had held weapons hours earlier were now building shelters. People who had once whispered about the danger of humans began to see them differently. Yes, they were powerful. Yes, they were capable of great destruction, but they were also capable of great kindness. When a reporter from a galactic network tried to ask one of the human commanders about the mission, the answer was simple. We came because someone asked for help. That's all. That short response became a symbol. It spread across worlds, quoted in news, art, and even council debates. It showed that humanity's strength was not just in its weapons or technology, it was in its heart. In the days that followed, the council sent messages of gratitude, though some leaders still felt uneasy. They couldn't help but wonder, if this was how humans acted when helping others, what would happen if they were truly threatened? But for Varan Prime, the question didn't matter. They were alive. Their world had been saved. The people who once thought they were forgotten had seen a side of humanity the galaxy had never truly known. The Deathworlders had arrived. And with them came not fear but hope. When the human fleet entered Varan Prime's orbit, the world below was still burning. Thick clouds of smoke rose into space like dark ribbons. Cities that had once glowed with life now looked broken, their streets covered in ash. From above, it looked hopeless. But to the humans, it was simply another challenge to face. And they had faced worse before. In the command deck of the lead vessel, the officers reviewed data coming from the surface. They saw enemy troop positions, civilian distress signals, and collapsing structures. Each red dot on their map wasn't just a location. It was a life waiting to be saved. Orders were sent out quickly, cleanly, without drama. And then, without delay, the first wave of human dropships descended. The sight of them was unforgettable. Hundreds of small craft cut through the clouds, their engines glowing like falling stars. The noise echoed across the ruined cities, shaking broken windows and turning every head toward the sky. For the people hiding in the rubble, that sound meant one thing: hope. When the first dropships landed, the humans stepped out in perfect formation. Their armor was dark, almost blending with the smoke. They moved quietly, scanning the area, marking safe paths for evacuees. To the terrified civilians, they looked like shadows, fast, silent, and focused. But soon those same shadows began to lift survivors out of danger. No one had ever seen anything like it. The aliens watching through live news feeds across the galaxy expected humans to arrive with fire and fury. Instead, what they saw were people who fought like guardians. Every movement had purpose. Every order was calm. Even in the middle of chaos, there was discipline, a kind of control that came from deep training and something more powerful: empathy. In one city, where fire still burned out of control, human teams went door to door scanning for life signs. The air was thick with heat, but they didn't stop. They pulled children from the rubble, carried the wounded on their backs, and worked side by side with the few local rescuers left alive. Some of the rescued couldn't understand the human language, but they didn't need to. The tone of their voices, the steady hand on their shoulder, and it said enough. It said, "You're not alone anymore." Even the local soldiers, who had been fighting hopelessly for days, stopped in disbelief when they saw the humans move. Their coordination was like nothing the galaxy had seen. While most species shouted orders through comms, humans used hand signals and gestures. They didn't panic. They adapted. They adjusted their tactics as if they could read the battlefield like a living thing. The alien commanders who were monitoring the battle couldn't look away. For years they had studied humans from a distance, curious but cautious. Now they were seeing what Death World discipline truly meant. Humans fought differently. When pinned down, they didn't retreat, they flanked. When surrounded, they didn't surrender, they improvised. They used terrain, sound, even debris as tools. Their machines didn't lead the battle, their instincts did. And yet, for all their skill in combat, what truly shocked the galaxy was their restraint. The enemy had taken hostages, used civilians as shields, and set traps in hospitals. Things that should have enraged any soldier. But the humans stayed calm. They didn't respond with blind destruction. They planned, they found angles, and they saved lives even when it meant risking their own. On one of the council stations orbiting nearby, representatives watched the human broadcasts in silence. The images showed humans forming protective circles around groups of frightened aliens, defending them from enemy fire while guiding them to safety. The commentators whispered, almost in disbelief, "They're not just soldiers, they're protectors." Back on Varen Prime, the enemy began to realize they had underestimated their opponents. Their scanners showed small squads of humans cutting through their strongholds one after another. Each strike was fast, clean, and devastatingly efficient. Within hours, enemy command centers started losing contact with their ground units. The invaders had never faced anything like it. They were used to opponents who fought for survival, not for others. But the humans weren't there for territory or glory. They were there to protect, and that made them unstoppable. In one district, a group of alien engineers trapped under a collapsed building saw a faint light cutting through the dust. It was a small drone marked with the Terran insignia. Moments later, human rescuers appeared using handheld tools to clear the rubble. They didn't ask for gratitude. They didn't pause for cameras. They just worked until everyone was safe. And when one of the survivors tried to thank them, the human simply replied, "We look out for each other. That's what we do." Those words spread faster than any report. They were replayed on galactic networks, quoted by diplomats and whispered by soldiers watching from afar. It became a sentence that carried meaning far beyond that battlefield, proof that the most feared species in the galaxy had a heart larger than anyone expected. The next morning, the skies of Varen Prime turned quiet. The main enemy ships had either been disabled or fled. Human aircraft patrolled the atmosphere, escorting evacuation convoys and supply transports. On the ground, teams set up large tents, generators, and field hospitals. By then, thousands of civilians had been rescued. The wounded received treatment from human medics who worked non-stop, their uniforms covered in dust and ash. They shared their rations, repaired alien equipment, and used human medical drones to assist local doctors. Even the alien media crews who arrived later were taken aback. One reporter described the scene like this: "They fight like storms but heal like rain." In the next few hours, more ships arrived from Earth, carrying supplies, power modules, and food. The entire operation was run with quiet precision. No boasting, no speeches, no arrogance. Humanity wasn't there to impress anyone. They were there to finish what they started, saving a world. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council's transmission boards were filled with questions. Every major government wanted updates. Some leaders were in awe. Others were uneasy. Watching humans in full action reminded everyone just how powerful they truly were. Not because of their weapons, but because of how they used them. Back on the surface, as the sun set for the first calm night in weeks, groups of survivors gathered around fires. Many of them couldn't stop staring at the human soldiers guarding the perimeter. They looked tired, covered in soot, their armor scratched and burnt, but their eyes stayed alert. No one told them to rest. They just refused to stop until every last life was accounted for. By midnight, Varen Prime's emergency broadcasts sent a message across the galaxy. The Death Worlders have landed. The enemy is retreating. The world stands. Those words lit up communication networks across 100 star systems. Entire populations stayed awake that night, watching the footage again and again. The black armored figures walking through fire to carry others out of danger. The quiet efficiency of their ships, the way they refused to abandon anyone. Some feared them even more after seeing that. Others, surprisingly, began to admire them, because beneath the strength and the discipline, there was something unmistakably human, a drive to protect, to endure, to help. When the morning light touched the ruined cities of Varen Prime, people saw human soldiers handing food to alien children. helping elders stand, and using their own energy cells to power local shelters. They didn't ask for payment or recognition. They just smiled tiredly and said, "We've got you." That moment, quiet and simple, changed how the galaxy saw humanity forever. The stories of the terrifying Death Worlders faded. In their place came new ones. Stories of protectors who crossed the stars not to conquer but to care. As one local leader later said in a broadcast, "We had heard the galaxy's warnings about them, but no one warned us that humans could be this kind." And somewhere high above in the command deck of the lead ship, the mission reports came in. Every number, every name, every rescued soul was recorded. The human commander looked out at the recovering planet below, a planet that now understood what humanity truly was. They didn't come to be feared. They came to be felt. And in that moment, the galaxy finally began to see them not as monsters from a death world, but as the most human beings in the stars. The smoke had begun to thin over Varen Prime, but the danger was far from over. The cities were scarred, and though the first waves of humans had brought hope, the enemy was still out there, regrouping, hiding in the forests, planning their next strike. The survivors had started to rebuild temporary shelters, and children could finally sleep without the sound of gunfire. But inside the human command tents, maps still glowed with red marks, each one a sign of hostile movement. The battle wasn't done. In the early hours before dawn, the humans received fresh intel from orbit. The raiders weren't retreating. They were preparing a counterattack. Their remaining ships had gathered in the shadows of Varen Prime's second moon, waiting to strike again. Most of the Council observers assumed the humans would fortify and defend, but that wasn't what happened. The humans didn't wait to be attacked. They moved first. Every soldier knew what that meant. The message that spread through the human ranks was simple. We take the fight to them. No emotion, no fear, just determination. As the human ships rose through the thin morning clouds, the sun caught their metallic hulls, turning them silver for a moment before they disappeared into the black of space. On the ground, the rescued civilians watched in silence. Some prayed. Others just stood still, hoping these strange protectors would come back. In orbit, the battle began almost instantly. The enemy fleet tried to scatter, but the humans had already anticipated their move. They didn't fight with brute force. They fought with precision. Their ships didn't chase blindly. They herded the enemy like hunters driving prey. Every human pilot knew their role, every command was crisp, and every shot counted. From a distance, it looked almost unreal. The enemy's massive warships tried to break through, but smaller human vessels darted between them, cutting engines and communications with expert timing. Within minutes, the raider fleet was trapped between two human squadrons. The Council's observation posts recorded the entire thing. One alien officer whispered, "They fight like they've already seen the battle before it happens." And in a way, that was true. Humanity had spent centuries learning from struggle, not just wars, but disasters, crises, and pain. Their strength came not from technology alone, but from experience. Every setback had made them sharper. Every loss had taught them to adapt. Back on Varen Prime, the humans on the surface prepared for the counterattack they knew was coming. Enemy ground forces had burrowed into the city ruins, waiting for a chance to strike once the human ships left orbit. But the humans had already planned for that too. Before leaving, they had placed hidden sensors, drones, and small automated sentries throughout the area. When the enemy moved, the humans saw it first. The traps weren't deadly and they were smart. Flash drones blinded advancing troops, sonic pulses disoriented them, and net projectors immobilized armored units. Within moments, human ground teams emerged from cover and pushed forward. The attackers had walked straight into a trap. The battle on the streets was intense but controlled. The humans didn't fight for revenge. They fought to end the chaos quickly. They used the environment, narrow alleys, broken rooftops, shattered walls, to their advantage. They didn't waste a single shot. Their goal wasn't to destroy, but to neutralize. The civilians who watched from basement saw the human soldiers move like shadows through the smoke. They seemed fearless, but there was something more behind their calm, a quiet sense of duty. In one destroyed neighborhood, a group of alien civilians was trapped in a half-collapsed building, as the enemy tried to use them as bait. The humans could have bombed the position from the air, but they didn't. Instead, they went in by foot. One team created a diversion, while another slipped in through the underground tunnels, pulling the hostages out one by one. When they emerged into daylight covered in dust, the rescued civilians couldn't believe what they saw. Humans carrying injured strangers as if they were their own. That was the moment the story of Varen Prime began to change. Across the galaxy, news broadcasts played footage of the human response. The most feared species in the stars wasn't destroying, it was protecting, rebuilding, and saving. Their faces were tired, their armor scratched, their voices hoarse, but they never stopped moving. As the battle dragged on, one truth became clear. The raiders weren't prepared for this. They had expected easy targets, frightened civilians, maybe a few patrol ships. They hadn't expected Earth's elite forces, soldiers trained on a world where survival was never guaranteed. On the fourth day, the last major enemy base was discovered deep within a mountain range. The terrain was unstable, filled with sharp ridges and old mining tunnels. Most armies would have waited for backup. The humans went in at dawn. Using small hovercrafts, they approached silently through the fog. Drones scouted ahead, marking heat signatures and weapon placements. When the time came, they struck fast, disabling defenses before the enemy even realized what was happening. The fight was short but fierce. When the dust settled, the mountain base was silent. The raiders' banners, once symbols of fear, now lay buried under the rubble. Instead of celebrating, the humans went straight to work again, searching for prisoners, gathering data, and securing what little tech remained. Every rescued civilian was treated first, no matter their species. Even injured enemies were given basic care once disarmed. That small act stunned the galaxy. Mercy wasn't a word many associated with humanity before that day. But here it was, displayed not as weakness but as strength. Hours later, transmissions from Varen Prime filled the airwaves. The message was short and clear. Hostile forces neutralized. Civilians safe. Planet secured. When the signal reached the Galactic Council, silence fell across the chamber. They had watched every moment. The landing, the rescue, the counterattack. They had seen what humans could do. Not in theory, but in truth. Some of them were relieved. Others were deeply unsettled. Because what they had witnessed wasn't just power. It was power guided by compassion, by purpose. Meanwhile, on the surface, the humans continued to rebuild. They repaired communication towers, cleared debris, and restored power grids. Children began to laugh again in the streets. Markets reopened. The smell of food cooking replaced the stench of fire and smoke. The people of Varen Prime started calling their human saviors something new: the Silent Guardians. When a local reporter asked one of them why they risked so much for a world that wasn't theirs, the soldier simply said, "We don't see strangers in danger. We see people." That line was broadcast across the galaxy and repeated millions of times. It reached planets that had once banned humans from their ports. It reached rulers who had once spoken against human expansion. And it made them rethink everything they believed about the species from Earth. The counterattack didn't just save Varen Prime. It reshaped galactic opinion. For the first time, entire civilizations began to see humanity not as a threat, but as something far greater, a force of will that refused to let others fall. In the following days, the remaining enemy forces surrendered. The humans didn't punish them harshly. They disarmed them, treated the wounded, and handed them over to the Council for trial. Even in victory, they showed restraint. And perhaps that was the most terrifying thing of all to those watching. The knowledge that humans had the power to destroy but chose not to. As night fell once more on Varen Prime, the skies were quiet. The stars reflected in the calm lakes below, and the hum of human machinery echoed softly in the distance. The people who once trembled in fear now slept peacefully, knowing they were safe, not because of a treaty, not because of luck, but because humanity had come. In the report sent back to Earth, the mission was marked as complete. No one on the planet would ever fully understand what those soldiers had done, how close Varen Prime had come to being lost forever, or how much it had changed the galaxy's view of humankind. But those who were there, those who had seen it with their own eyes, would never forget. They would remember the black ships descending through fire. They would remember the quiet words, the steady hands, and the courage that didn't need to be shouted. And they would remember the moment they realized that the most feared species in the galaxy wasn't terrifying because of how they fought but because of why they fought. After the victory on Varan Prime, a calm spread across the planet, but the rest of the galaxy was far from quiet. News of what had happened traveled faster than light. Every broadcast, every data channel, every outpost in the outer colonies repeated the same words. Human elite forces secured Varan Prime. For some, it was a message of hope. For others, it was a warning. On distant worlds, leaders gathered in silent rooms watching replay after replay of the battle footage. They saw the precision, the discipline, and the strange mix of mercy and might that had defined the humans' actions. In one council chamber, a representative from the Vurian Empire said softly, "They could have taken the planet for themselves." Another replied, "Yes. And they didn't. That's what scares me the most." Humanity's reputation had always been complicated in the galaxy. They were seen as unpredictable, capable of both great kindness and great destruction. Many worlds still remembered the early days of humanity's space expansion, rough, loud, and full of mistakes. But now the footage from Varan Prime showed something new, something polished, united, and deeply purposeful. Across the stars, people began to question what kind of species humans really were. Back on Varan Prime, the soldiers didn't think about politics or reputation. They worked day and night to help rebuild what the war had destroyed. They shared food with locals, repaired homes, and set up water systems. The soldiers laughed with children, fixed broken machines, and helped farmers plant again in the ashes. What they didn't realize was that cameras were watching them the whole time. Footage of humans repairing alien homes, offering medical aid, and playing with children spread everywhere. It wasn't planned propaganda, it was real. It was simple acts of care caught on film, and that truth was stronger than any speech. In the following days, the council held an emergency meeting to discuss the human question. Many feared that humanity's growing influence could shift the balance of power. But when they tried to speak against them, the people of Varan Prime themselves joined the broadcast. A survivor spoke directly to the council. His voice shook, but his words were clear. "We were dying. The humans came not to conquer, but to help. They gave us food, medicine, safety. If that makes them dangerous, then maybe the galaxy needs a little danger." Those words echoed across thousands of systems. The council could not ignore them. Meanwhile, the human fleet remained stationed around Varan Prime to ensure no new threats appeared. The commanders received encrypted orders from Earth: observe, assist, and prepare for diplomatic contact. The mission wasn't over yet. One quiet night, as the stars glowed over the recovering city, a few soldiers sat outside their outpost looking up at the sky. They weren't talking about victory or glory. They were talking about home, about families waiting, the food they missed, the smell of rain on Earth. One of them said softly, "We came all this way to fight monsters, but maybe we're showing them what it means to be human." That small moment captured the entire mission's spirit. Far away, on another world, a group of alien students watched human documentaries for the first time. They saw images of Earth, its mountains, oceans, storms, and cities. They saw humans smiling, laughing, building, and sometimes crying, and they realized something no one had said out loud. Humans were not fearless, but they acted despite fear. That was what made them strong. Soon, the first representatives from nearby planets arrived on Varan Prime to meet the human commanders. They expected cold soldiers or arrogant conquerors. What they found instead were tired men and women who smiled warmly, offered them coffee, and asked how their own people were recovering. It confused them, in a good way. Meetings were held in half-rebuilt halls, with dust still in the air and tools lying around. No one cared about protocol or rank. Everyone sat together sharing ideas. Humans listened more than they spoke. They didn't demand tribute or resources. They asked how they could help rebuild trade routes and schools. It wasn't a negotiation. It was cooperation. The council's observers reported this back, and slowly a shift began. Worlds that once refused contact with Earth started opening small embassies. Scientists asked to exchange data. Medics requested training in human disaster response. And in less than a month, what began as a rescue operation turned into the start of something much bigger, a bridge between species that had once been afraid of each other. But not everyone was pleased at the same raider factions that had attacked Varen Prime were regrouping in the shadows, furious at their defeat. Their leaders spread rumors calling humans invaders in disguise. They sent spies to gather information and tried to turn other worlds against them. Human intelligence units discovered this quickly. Instead of responding with threats, they sent envoys carrying proof. Data logs, rescue reports, medical records, all showing the truth of what had happened. That quiet move turned the tide again. People saw facts, not fear. While all this unfolded, Earth itself was calm but watchful. News of the soldiers' heroism reached every home. People felt proud, but they also understood the weight of what it meant. Humanity was no longer the newcomer species at the edge of the galaxy. They were becoming leaders, not through conquest but through example. And leadership came with responsibility. On Varen Prime, the rebuilding reached a new stage. The once burned city began to shine again. New schools opened, new lights glowed at night, and laughter returned to the streets. The humans didn't stay in command. They handed control back to the locals and stayed only as helpers and protectors. One elderly alien said during a farewell gathering, "We feared them because we didn't understand them. Now we understand why they fear for others, not for themselves." Those words were broadcast live, and millions watched them across the galaxy. The human commander gave a short reply before leaving. "If you ever call again, we will come." That's a promise. That promise was recorded and remembered. The moment the human ships lifted off from Varen Prime, the skies filled with cheers and lights. Children waved at the departing vessels, and even the alien military saluted. For the first time in centuries, a world celebrated soldiers not for conquering, but for saving. In the weeks that followed, rumors spread of new human alliances forming. Some said humanity was quietly organizing a coalition of worlds that believed in protection and unity. Others whispered that their elite forces were already training volunteers from other species to defend their own worlds. No one knew the full truth, but everyone could see one thing clearly: the galaxy was changing. For some, that change brought peace. For others, it brought fear. But one undeniable fact remained: humanity had proven that power and empathy could exist together. The phrase "the elite of Earth" became a legend, not just among soldiers, but among civilians who had never seen war. It became a symbol of hope. Even in distant mining colonies and deep space stations, stories of Varen Prime spread like wildfire. Workers painted human emblems on their walls. Children played games pretending to be rescuers from Earth. It wasn't about glory. It was about courage, teamwork, and compassion. The galaxy, which had once whispered in fear of humanity, was now whispering something else: respect. But deep inside human command, the leaders knew something others didn't. Varen Prime had been only one battle, one warning. There were darker forces gathering beyond known space, and humanity's next challenge would be far greater. Still, for now, they allowed themselves a rare moment of peace. Back on Earth, lights shone from the blue oceans to the cold mountain peaks as messages arrived from other worlds. Words of gratitude, offers of friendship, and pledges of cooperation. Humanity had stepped into a role it never asked for but could no longer avoid: the defenders of the galaxy's fragile balance. And in quiet corners of the universe, where people once whispered in fear, a new question began to echo. If this is what humanity's elite can do to save one world, what will they do when the entire galaxy calls for help? Months had passed since the battle for Varen Prime. The planet was alive again. Lights glittered across its rebuilt cities, and laughter echoed through the same streets that once shook with explosions. The human ships had long since departed, but their presence was still felt everywhere. In the rebuilt homes, in the medical centers, in the people's hearts. The humans hadn't stayed to rule. They never asked for reward or territory. They had simply come, helped, and left quietly. But the echo of what they did kept growing. Across the galaxy, stories about Earth's elite forces spread from one star system to another. Each version was slightly different, but all carried the same message. When humans came, hope followed. In distant colonies, people painted the human insignia on their walls for protection. On trading ships, captains played recordings of the human commander's last words before takeoff. "If you ever call again, we will come." It became a promise the galaxy would never forget. But while the people celebrated peace, deep in the shadows of uncharted space, something else was stirring. The same raider factions that had lost at Varen Prime weren't gone. They had fled to the far edges of known space, wounded but alive. There in the dark, they gathered others. Broken armies, exiled warlords. Those who hated the humans for showing mercy where they had shown none. They were united by one thought: revenge. When the first rumors reached the Galactic Council, many didn't believe it. They thought no one would dare rise again after what humanity had done. But the humans knew better. They had seen this pattern before. Evil rarely disappears. It hides and waits. And so, quietly, humanity began to prepare. The same elite forces that had saved Varen Prime were called back to Earth. They didn't return to applause or celebration. They returned to train harder, faster, smarter. New recruits joined, not from Earth alone, but from other planets too. Aliens who had fought beside humans or seen their courage now asked to serve alongside them. It was something no one in the galaxy had ever seen. A mixed unit, trained under human command but built from many worlds. The humans didn't see them as outsiders. They saw them as brothers and sisters in purpose. This time, the fight wouldn't be just for one planet. It would be for all. As weeks turned into months, the Council received a message from a frontier world. The raiders were back, larger, more organized, more ruthless. They had taken over several colonies and were demanding tribute. When the Council debated sending fleets, no one could agree who should lead. That's when one simple signal came from Earth: humanity volunteers. The chamber went silent. Everyone knew what that meant. The same species that had already proven its strength was stepping forward again, not out of pride but responsibility. And this time, they weren't coming alone. When the fleet departed from Earth's orbit, it wasn't just human ships. Vessels from Varen Prime, the Althan Republic, and the small worlds of the Outer Ring joined them. On each hull, painted in bright colors, was the same symbol: a hand reaching out from a blue planet surrounded by stars. The sign of unity. It wasn't an invasion fleet. It was a promise made real. As the Armada jumped through hyperspace, transmissions flooded in from across the galaxy. Messages of support, encouragement, and hope. People watched from their homes as the lights of the human-led coalition disappeared into the void. When the fleet arrived at the war-torn frontier, they found devastation, cities burning, families fleeing, entire worlds under siege. The raiders had built massive war stations in orbit, dark fortresses that blocked out the sun. For a brief moment, even the bravest soldiers felt the weight of what lay ahead. But then, one by one, they remembered Varen Prime, how the impossible had been done once before. The command came through calmly: let's bring them hope again. And with that, the battle began. The human elite led the first wave. Their ships didn't charge recklessly. They moved with purpose, cutting through enemy lines like a blade through smoke. Every ship, every pilot, every soldier knew exactly what to do. The enemy tried to overwhelm them with numbers, but it didn't work. The coalition worked as one. Humans and aliens fought side by side, covering each other, sharing supplies, rescuing wounded without hesitation. It wasn't about species or rank anymore. It was about trust. On the ground, the fighting was fierce. The enemy had fortified every position, using civilians as shields, but the human-led teams didn't fall into the trap. They used precision strikes, drone guidance, and evacuation corridors to save as many lives as possible. Reporters from across the galaxy followed the operation in real time. They saw human medics rushing into fire to pull strangers to safety. They saw soldiers sharing their rations with hungry children. They saw humanity not as conquerors but as protectors, and the galaxy watched in awe. For days the battle raged. The raiders fought with desperation, but the coalition never broke. At the heart of it all, the humans stood steady, calm, focused, unstoppable. Finally, after the 6th day, the largest enemy fortress fell. The human banner, surrounded by symbols of other worlds, was raised high. The war was over, but instead of celebration, there was silence. The soldiers looked around at the destruction, the broken cities, the people who had lost everything, and they knew their real work was just beginning. The rebuilding started immediately. Humans shared their technology. Engineers from other worlds joined in, and soon new homes began to rise from the ruins. The people didn't see this as a military victory. They saw it as the beginning of something greater, a united galaxy. Back at the Council, a historic declaration was made. For the first time in known history, an alliance was formed not based on fear, but on shared belief. They called it the Stellar Accord, and humanity was asked to lead it. At first, the humans hesitated. Leadership wasn't what they had come for, but the Council insisted. The galaxy had seen enough destruction, enough division. It needed a guide, someone who understood both strength and compassion. And so, Earth accepted, not as rulers but as guardians. In the years that followed, new academies were built where humans trained soldiers and diplomats from dozens of worlds. Instead of teaching them how to conquer, they taught them how to protect, how to rebuild, how to lead with empathy. Children across the galaxy grew up learning about Earth's values, courage, resilience, and mercy. Statues were raised not to heroes but to helpers, and through it all the humans remained humble. They didn't claim credit for saving the galaxy. They always said the same thing: we just did what was right. Many years later, when the first monument was unveiled on Varan Prime, it wasn't a statue of a soldier holding a weapon. It was a sculpture of two hands, one human, one alien, and reaching toward each other. Below it was a single line carved in both languages. They came in our darkest hour, and they stayed until there was light. That line became part of galactic history. It reminded everyone what humanity had shown, that power was not measured by how much you could destroy, but by how much you could protect. Back on Earth, the veterans of the elite forces lived quietly. They didn't see themselves as legends, even though the galaxy did. To them, they were just people who answered a call when it came. Sometimes, when they gathered at the ocean's edge or under the stars, they would talk about the past, about the faces they saved, the worlds they saw, and the friendships they made. They would smile, remembering how far things had come. One of them once said softly, "Maybe that's humanity's real power. We don't just survive, we help others survive with us." That truth echoed through generations, because even though the galaxy had once feared humanity, it now understood them. They weren't the monsters the stories had warned of. They were the ones who stood up when no one else would. And long after the battles ended, when new worlds joined the Stellar Accord and peace spread across the stars, there was still one unspoken belief shared by all. If danger ever returned, if the darkness ever rose again, humanity would come not for glory, not for conquest, but because it's who they are. The defenders of hope, the keepers of light, the ones the galaxy once feared, and now could never live without.